Good morning. It's June 25th, 2021. Welcome to the Civic Caucus Friday interview. The Civic Caucus is dedicated to nonpartisan debate and discussion of issues important to Minnesota. I'm Janis, the chair, here with the Civic Caucus interview group. I want to express our deep thanks to our speakers today from Charter for Change, a citywide nonpartisan grassroots group of Minneapolis residents. The group has worked to distill the complicated discussion on charter change and try to make it understandable to voters and help them make informed decisions. Mary Moos, a part of the group, will get us started today. Lee Munich will moderate, and we're also joined by Cherie Stofer and Sonia Cairns. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Mary.
Hi, we're happy to be here today. I'm Mary Moos, and I'm here with my colleagues Lee Munich, Sonia Cairns, and Cherie Stofer as representatives of Charter for Change. Thanks for having us. We're part of a group of nonpartisan citywide Minneapolis volunteers who support the Minneapolis Charter Commission's charter amendment called Charter for Change. We have an important election coming up in November. In this presentation, we'll be sharing information that we hope will help you make an informed decision on this ballot initiative. Currently, our city is in crisis. The pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, civil unrest, economic distress, persistent inequities. These are symptoms of a much greater problem. Many of you already are aware of this problem. Quite simply, our city government is, as currently structured, is not working. We need to transform policing. We need a city that works for everyone. The Charter Commission's proposal provides a realistic plan to create a city that is just, safe, and works for everyone. It creates a foundation for effective and sustainable police department reform. It does not eliminate the police department. This amendment creates a structure for a strong city government, a city government that is much more responsive, effective, accountable, and safe. Here's what some of our city leaders have shared with us.
Changes to the charter are long overdue. Our governance structure is unnecessarily complicated, and it's difficult for citizens and our administrative staff to navigate. And this causes the line of authority and accountability to be unclear. A city council member is elected to represent the unique needs of the citizens in their ward. The mayor is elected citywide and is responsible to advance a shared agenda affirmed by the citizens and benefiting the entire city. Now, I've held both these positions, and I know firsthand how those lines can and have been blurred and undermined. Now, I'm a strong believer in shared power and authority, but it's time to state clearly and succinctly in the city charter that the mayor is the chief executive authority in the city and that the city council has legislative authority. I believe the mayor, who is elected citywide, should have the authority to appoint all of the city department heads for a period of time consistent with the mayor's 4-year term, and that the city council should maintain the right to approve or reject those nominations. Minneapolis does not need 14 mayors. Minneapolis needs 1 chief executive and 13 strong city council members with legislative responsibility and authority.
Our city needs a strong executive, the mayor. When I was the city's finance officer, I saw numerous occasions where city council members gave confusing directions and requests to my fellow city leaders. It was confusing, expensive, and time-consuming. This is not the way our city should be led.
Hi, I'm Don Samuels, I'm former council member in the city of Minneapolis for 3 terms, a resident of the 5th Ward, and where I was a council member, and where Sandra and I raised 3 girls, and a couple of our girls from birth to college. So I've lived in the community for a long time and experienced the disparities of our community and experienced the challenges of city government, especially to deliver services and resources to communities like mine. It's hard to get things done in the city of Minneapolis. People complain a lot. Why is it so easy to get things done in St. Paul and not Minneapolis? The answer is really simple. Minneapolis city staff has 14 bosses. That means the mayor and 13 council members. So to get anything done, you have to persuade the mayor and 7 council members to get a majority to get anything done. Now that makes day-to-day execution of policy and decision-making for departments very, very slow, tedious, and sometimes impossible. But when it comes to an emergency, an urgent situation, which requires a quick response, where it's not a month-by-month decision, but an hour-by-hour decision to make our communities safe, then 14 bosses is absolutely ridiculous. And it leads to problems in decision-making and hesitation and inefficiencies that cost lives and eventually lead to great disparities between one community and another. And we saw that at play in 2020 after George Floyd was killed, when decisions had to be made around public safety as the riots started to increase across the city, and especially in my community where most of the violence has happened and is still happening. To take that back is going to be a painful and difficult process, and the City Charter Commission is trying to help us by changing the charter to give more authority to the mayor and more authority over city department heads as any other mayor. Minneapolis is called a weak mayor system vis-a-vis a strong mayor system. It's really not that. It's a weak mayor system vis-a-vis a regular mayor system. And what we want is a regular mayor. Not a strong mayor, a regular mayor like other cities of our size have, so that this mayor can strongly come out, create a plan for the restoration of safety. And now we have an opportunity through this charter change proposed by the Charter Commission to set things right for the people of Minneapolis, especially the people who need it most, my neighbors in North Minneapolis. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
So Lee, are you going to share the slides?
Oh, you are on mute.
Great. So it's good to hear some of our city leaders talk about their support for a more responsive, accountable, and just government. This is most important for people who can't afford to buy private services. We will not have equity in our city if we don't have a city government that works. And we need a government that addresses the issues of our time. Next slide. So why now? The events of 2020 demonstrated the urgent need to make city government work better and make our city just and safe for everyone. Minneapolis city government proved ill-equipped to provide a coordinated strategic response and to limit the damage. Our Charter Commission determined that now is the time to study city government. They have proposed an amendment that provides a path to address the critical issues facing our city and improving city government. Next slide. So how can we improve our city government? How can we make sure it works? We can support this Charter Commission proposal that clarifies roles and responsibilities of both the mayor and the city council. It provides a path to make our city government more accountable, efficient, and responsive. It would enable reform of the police department, not eliminate it. We'll talk more about this shortly. Next slide. So what's the problem? This cartoon was in the Star Tribune in 2004 entitled Minneapolis, Who's in Charge? And it clearly illustrates what our Charter Commission found this year when it studied city government after last year's civil unrest. This is their conclusion in their final report, quoted from them. President Truman, Harry Truman, famously quipped, "The buck stops here." In Minneapolis, the buck stops nowhere and everywhere, leading to organizational confusion, costly duplication of efforts, lack of centralized control and coordination, and especially under stress, chaos. We have a 14 boss problem in Minneapolis. Department heads report to our mayor, elected citywide and representing nearly 500,000 residents, and to 13 council members who are each elected by ward to represent only 34,000 residents. The substance of city government is providing basic city services to get the job done. The direction of city staff is not rhetorical, it's the work of city government. And again, this is most important for people in need, those who can't afford to buy city private services. We will not solve the inequities in our city without this change. Our current structure, as you can see, is harmful to the future of our city. It is a disincentive to the recruitment and retention of qualified professionals to consider working for the city. In the last 2 years, 6 charter department heads have left the city during their appointed terms. Just to name a few: 2 city coordinators, 1 public works director, fire chief, civil rights director, and more. Former elected officials and charter department heads unanimously stated in recent Charter Commission interviews that our current structure lacks strong accountability, is overly complex, and is highly inefficient. Here are 3 examples of the 14 boss problem. First, during last year's civil unrest, some council members gave direct orders to police officers, making the situation more dangerous and contributing to mass confusion. 2, some council members routinely give orders to department heads and their staffs with threats of retaliation that conflict with city policy. And 3, in 2020, council members stripped from the chief of police and mayor key tools to enable police reform. Next slide. So how did we get to this chaos? In 1920, as you all know, Minneapolis voted to become a home rule city under the state constitution. And as a home rule city, we must have our own charter. Minneapolis voters rejected 6 charters before finally adopting one in 1920 that was simply a consolidation of existing state laws that applied to the city at that time. There was no deliberate design of our system of city government. Minneapolis has a complicated city structure, unlike any other in the country, and proposals to change and improve this structure began immediately after 1920. Several amendments since then have contributed to our system being unorthodox and complex. So after becoming a home rule city, the state constitution required Minneapolis to have a standing charter commission to guide us in our charter work. You're going to be hearing a lot of rhetoric for the next 5 to 6 months about the unelected charter commission. So remember, it's required under our state constitution. The chief judge of Hennepin County appoints these volunteer members based on their knowledge and experience in local government. They're demographically representative of the city, and their charge is to study government structure to ensure our government works for all of us. They're like our own think tank. They've studied our 14 boss problem this year and have proposed a charter amendment to solve the problem. You, the voters, get to make the final decision. So Lee, let's talk about solutions.
I think that wasn't Cheryl going to do this part?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Cherie, I'm looking right at your face. Cherie Stofer. And Cherie, I think you're muted.
I am, thank you. So hello everyone, and I'd like to thank you for all the good work you're doing for our city. So, okay, this is the Charter Commission's recommendation. The Charter Commission amendment recommends a clear separation of the mayor's executive role and the council's legislative and oversight role. You will be asked to vote yes or no. Minneapolis has always had a mayor-council form of government. So are we on the next slide? Yeah. And here is an organizational chart. Did we move on? Okay. One more. Okay, there we go. Here's an organizational chart of the current Minneapolis city government from the city clerk's office. The department head, and you'll see those outlined in red, directs essential city services that we rely on. For example, solid waste collection, clean water, snow plowing, emergency response, police and fire department, inspections, civil rights, and community planning. The appointing authority of these department heads is the executive committee, which was added in the 1980s and which includes the mayor, the council president, and 3 council members. The mayor recommends department head appointments to the executive committee for approval, which then sends the appointments to the council for approval. All of these department heads, with the sole exception of the police department, report to the mayor and to the council committees. Minneapolis' city government is a $1.5 billion enterprise with 3,800 employees. Well, who runs this enterprise? Both the mayor and the city council have significant responsibilities, but there's really no one in charge running this $1.5 billion enterprise, including all of the other public safety functions that need to coordinate with the police department. There is no executive officer. Next slide. So here we have the Charter Commission's proposed structure. All voters in the city elect the mayor, who oversees operating departments, and the executive committee is eliminated. Voters in each ward elect their council members, as they do today, who set city policy and have an extended office of the auditor at their disposal, similar to our state legislative auditor, Jim Nobles, to monitor the implementation of the policies and laws that they've passed. Next slide. So what the Charter Commission is proposing is no power grab. And here is an illustration of our federal and state models of government, separating executive and legislative functions is really modeled after our federal and state models with the independent branches of government. Next slide. And here's a good example to look at. It's the city of Duluth's city structure. This is comparable to the structure of most large U.S. city governments, as well as the other first-class cities in Minnesota, St. Paul, Rochester, and of course Duluth. This proposal creates a clear and a balanced form of government. The Charter Commission's proposed government structure amendment clarifies the role, the mayor and the council's roles and responsibilities. So the mayor is the chief executive with responsibility and authority for proposing the direction of the city through the annual State of the City address and the annual operating and capital budgets, implementing day-to-day administrative operations, nominating and supervising charter department heads, and ensuring the delivery of basic city services. The City Council is the legislative and policy-making body that defines the level of city services in the adoption of city ordinances and the annual operating and capital budget. They will continue to advocate for their constituents, ensuring the quality and fairness of the delivery of city services, in addition to ensure the city's work is done according to the policies they've set. They will have enhanced oversight through the financial and performance audits by the newly expanded city auditor. What does the Charter Commission's proposed amendment do for us? Well, first, the mayor, elected by all the voters in Minneapolis, has the authority and responsibility to provide city services that are better and equitable for everyone, and promotes a shared citywide agenda. Second, council members elected by their ward have the authority and responsibility to advocate for the delivery of quality and equitable city services to their ward, to perform oversight just like our Congress does over our federal departments, and to work with the mayor to approve the budget for providing these services. Third, clear direction to the department heads by the mayor ensures coordination, wiser spending of our dollars, and improved city services. Also, the alignment of authority and responsibility ensures enhanced accountability. The people of the city will know who is responsible for getting the work of the city done. Just as important.
Could you move your script so it's not blocking your face in the screen? Thank you.
It shouldn't be. So we haven't quite finished that one. Public safety functions are consolidated, including prevention services, and coordinated under the administrative direction of the mayor and with the council retaining its policy role. And lastly, this amendment clearly retains the existing city charter requirement to have a police department. Okay. So here is the ballot language that was drafted by the Charter Commission and the city attorney. It will be submitted to the City Council, which has the final say, although the mayor can veto. I'll read this for you. Executive Mayor Legislative Council. Shall the Minneapolis City Charter be amended to make the mayor the city's chief executive officer and administrative authority, and to make the City Council the legislative body with general legislative policymaking and oversight authority in the city, with the general nature of the amendments being briefly indicated in the explanatory note below, which is made a part of this ballot, so we don't have that note here. In November, there will be other charter amendments on the city ballot. 2 possible rent stabilization proposals, the modern version of rent control. One would be to authorize rent control in the city, and one to allow a limited initiative by citizens petition in the future. We may have 2 possible public safety proposals, one by the City Council and the Yes for Minneapolis petition. The 2 public safety proposals are best understood visually. Both proposals continue the 14 boss system. So let's look at this drawing. I want you to look at it closely because it's kind of the heart of the problem. It really illustrates the impact of the different charter proposals. So on the left, that's our current structure. It illustrates the 14 boss problem. The executive committee is the hiring authority for all the department heads, including the police chief, even though the police chief reports to the mayor. All other public safety functions report to 14 bosses, and the city council and its public safety committee exert policy and budgetary oversight over the police. The result, well, it's a lack of accountability and complexity. This is the problem the Charter Commission's proposal is attempting to solve. So let's take a look at the middle illustration, the Yes for Minneapolis Council proposals. These proposals also continue the 14 boss problem. They would remove the police department from the charter, create a new Department of Public Safety whose director reports to the mayor and the council, 14 bosses. The council version would include a law enforcement division reporting to the Commissioner of Public Safety. The Yes for Petition proposal is similar, but provides licensed law enforcement only if necessary. The proposal would not give the mayor the necessary executive authority and responsibility for police reform or the coordination of public safety functions. On the right, you'll see this is our last proposal, is the Charter Commission's proposal. This would solve the 14 boss problem. It would establish the mayor as the city chief executive and maintain the council as a legislative body of the city with expanded policy oversight. It clarifies that all public safety department heads would report to the mayor. This proposal would maintain official council action to shape policy and gives the mayor the authority to implement the policy reforms. The integration of the public safety functions would create a better structure, provide better coordination among programs, and lead to innovation and reform. If you want the police department reformed but not eliminated, the Charter Commission's proposal provides a path. So to be sure, no charter amendment can do the following. They can't give us a better contract between the City of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Federation of Police. Our city leaders should and must negotiate that for us. None have the ability to end state laws requiring mandatory arbitration, and none have the ability to end qualified immunity required under federal law, but which could be ended by the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, under the consideration in Congress right now. So for you, good questions, and for all our citizens, good questions to ask about public safety under each of these proposals as you decide how you want our city to look in the future. Who's in charge? Will there be a police department? How many bosses for that department? Who gives the direction of the police chief in an emergency? And who hires and fires the police chief? So who supports the Charter Commission's proposed amendment? Well, citizens like you, Charter Commission members who voted unanimously in favor of this proposal, former council presidents and members, former mayors, current former Minneapolis department heads, and the League of Women Voters. If you want a city government that is more responsive, effective, accountable, the Charter Commission's proposal provides a path. So the choice is yours in November. You can keep up to date on the charter amendments. Just go ahead and Google Minneapolis Charter Amendment proposals, and by going to the city's website. You can also find the Charter Commission's reports on the city structure there. We believe our city is united in a shared vision for the future. A just city that addresses systemic racism, provides equitable housing, education, job training, jobs. A safe city that transforms policing, supports the Department of Justice investigation of the Minneapolis Police Department. A collaborative city that partners with Hennepin County for necessary social services. Seeks public safety reform from the state. So here's our last slide. Please visit our website Share it with your friends, colleagues, neighbors, and we invite you to join us as a supporter and give us permission to list you as a supporter on our website. So please let us know. This would be really helpful if you can think of any groups that would appreciate hearing this presentation. So thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to Lee now for questions.
Well, thank you, Mary and Sonia and Cherie. I should say that we're a team of 4 people, and there are, I think, about 50 or 60 people who are now involved in Charter for Change, who are going to be doing this type of presentation to different groups. This is just the second time we've given it, and we still have a lot of technical glitches, I guess, that we need to figure out, in addition to my management of slides and things like that. So we're still kind of working on those things. But we like to open it up and take any questions or comments about this from people. I know that the Civic Caucus has had several meetings where we've talked about the charter and police reform. So this is an attempt to try to present this to a larger audience, and we'd appreciate your thoughts and comments and questions. So I think the way we've done this before is that people can raise their hands, and using the hand raising function, or I'll try to just watch people, and whoever wants to speak, if you want to wave your hand, I'll get to you that way. So who wants to start? Unmute yourself, T.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I've had an opportunity to have conversations with several people about this, and particularly in my own ward, talk with people from the 5th Ward Council person's office who've been lobbying me a lot. And they are supporting this change to creating the Public Safety Commission, but it is to report to the City Council, which I think is disastrous. I like your proposal, and I think anything other than something that separates and identifies the City Council as a legislative body, not an executive body trying to manage the operations, it's not going to work. And I like the fact that you identify the mayor as the chief executive officer and puts the responsibility there, where we all vote for the mayor, and if we don't like the job that she or he is doing, we can get out and organize and get rid of them, But if we don't like what the City Council is doing, the only one I can deal with is the one that represents me, and that's the system. I've never liked the setup that we have here, so I want to congratulate you for the work that you have done in putting together a well organized presentation, and it makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you, T. Lynn, do you want to unmute yourself? Lynn, were you going to comment? I thought I saw you. You got to unmute if you're going to talk. Lynn Carlson.
You're muted.
Oh, maybe he doesn't want to ask. Well, I see Ed Dirkswager. Ed, do you want to raise or unmute yourself?
Thank you. In the 1980s, I was Don Fraser's first deputy mayor. And at the time, the planning department and the police department, civil rights, and something that Don Risk ran, reported to the mayor.
Industrial Development
Ollie
Commission.
Byram was the planning director, Jake Kardowski was the budget director, reported. And Don presented a strategic plan. And since those people reported to him, the planning, budgeting, and police, civil rights, we were able to hold them accountable. Created a lot of tension, but we had strong people in those roles. And so tension aside, the council couldn't push people around, and in part because of Fraser's popularity in the public. That was changed by Don, and I opposed it. I opposed the changes because I thought it would diminish the role of the mayor, and I think it did. But your structure does go in the direction of making a change which could be significant. I say could be because it all depends on the people in the roles of mayor and the people the mayor chooses to run the departments. They have to be strong and they have to be able to withstand the barbs of the council. The one thing I wonder about, two things. One is the council is very concerned about constituent services, and in part they bug the heck out of all department heads, as Lee knows and others know, to get better services for their constituents, and that isn't going to go away, nor should it go away. The other suggestion I have about the presentation is that this will not solve the systemic problems in the police department. It may give someone authority to begin planning for that, or it would, but it won't solve it. And so in your presentation, I'm wondering if you don't need to emphasize that a little bit more. The fact that it gives authority to do this, and it puts the accountability in one place and gives authority to do it, because a lot of people don't want to get rid of the police department, but almost everybody understands it's got to change, and so that this isn't a reform of the police department. It is opening the door so that reform can happen more rationally and thoughtfully, and less politically. And I would make that part of the presentation.
So, Sonia.
Well, I just wanted to comment on that. I think it's very helpful. One of the things we're trying to do is to distinguish what happens now with this particular council, constantly undermining the chief and the mayor. And while this project is nonpartisan, we're not supporting a mayor or anyone else. We're looking toward the long term. And so if people can see what has happened that has been so destructive, that's caused so many significant staff people to leave and more, they might hear this more clearly. But we've been told by many people, you just have to say it again and again and again. And that's what we're trying to do. We've got meetings. I think we have 50 people holding meetings over the next 5-6 months to repeat the message that you, Ed, are saying. And we'll try to sharpen it.
So can I ask a question of Ed? It was Ed, right, that spoke?
Yeah, Cherie.
So, and I kind of questioned this also. Does this proposal attempt to try to say it's going to solve police reform, or it's going to help with, the question is it a structural proposal to get the city in place so that the next step, a foundation, so that the next step is police reform? Or is it trying to do, does it sound to you like it's trying to do both and therefore missing the mark? I mean, I guess that's the question.
Well, I think it's clearly a structural proposal, and I don't think it's trying to do both. I just think that since the police department change is such a hot topic that you made the point in the presentation that this doesn't solve it, that this is a structural change that makes something possible. I just don't know how rational the voters will be, and I don't know how to present it. I'm raising the issue because you people are much more involved and much more in touch with the voters. But consider what I've said and reject it if after considering it and listening to people, you think so. I really want this to pass. And the question is, what's the best political avenue to make that happen?
So I wonder, Clarence had his hand up first, but Paul, were you responding to Ed, or did you have your own question or comment?
Well, in part, but I can wait my turn. That's okay, Lee.
Okay, great. So Clarence Shellbetter is next. Unmute yourself, Clarence.
Okay. I've been around this discussion of how to organize city government many times, and I'm familiar with the analysis. And my concern is twofold. One of which is that I personally think a whole lot of the public who are going to go to the polls. We've seen all kinds of people show up at the polls in the last three elections, and a whole lot of them, frankly, know very little, what I can see. They're not long-time students of this thing like the League of Women Voters are, or the Citizens League was. And consequently, they need to be educated. I think to educate people about this kind of a question, you got to take the discussion one step beyond where I think you're taking it, which is, hey, we've got chaos, we've got these problems, but you really have to have examples that illustrate the consequences of the chaos, the consequences of the complexity of making decisions, the consequences of people leaving their jobs. What happened in the city? Did it go on, or did it fall apart, or what happened? You need to illustrate this with examples continuously. The second question I think that is important is this whole discussion, as Ed has suggested, whether we like it or not, the police department and its behavior is going to be front and center, the biggest topic on the ballot and in the discussion. And it's confusing because the mayor currently has the responsibility for selecting the police chief. And he has some of the violence prevention operations under his office right now. The question they're going to ask is, so what's going to happen to address these challenges? And I think you have to say, I don't know how you do it, but you got to make the case that we're really going to get some resolution to this mess. Now, in 40 years, from what I've seen, we have not had a management position in the negotiation of that contract with the union. We have no management in charge of negotiating the positions of management vis-a-vis that union contract, and how you discipline individuals whose behavior is out of bounds. Number one. Number two, you've got some things in the state law that are making this complicated, and they're there largely because of the advocacy on the part of that union and others. And I asked the question, has the city council ever, in its many requests of the state legislature of the state every year, put this question of changes to the bargaining law on the list of things the city needs to have changed? Best I can tell, no. It's not there. The city isn't asking for that stuff. How do you get the city basically to become a responsible representative of management? I think it's a central question. It's going to come up. And the question is, how do you do it? And how, given the way we've got things organized now, does that not happen? And how will, or at least strongly might it happen, because you change the responsibilities of people in the city, the mayor and the city council, for various actions. I think you've got to be able to demonstrate to the voters that this is really going to make it likely possible. Maybe all it does is it gets stronger people to run for these positions. I don't know. My final comment is, I think in your videotape, the strongest comments are made by Don Samuels. They're the ones that ring clearer and more obviously to the challenge that the city's dealing with right now. And I'm not saying the police is the only challenge, it's not, but I mean, it is front and center, the political issue of the hour. And it will be in this election, because we're going to be making choices about competing charter amendments that deal specifically with this question. End of comments.
So thank you, Clarence. Those are all good comments about this. One thing I did check further, because you brought up to me this who negotiates the contracts, and basically the city coordinator negotiates the contracts. I think as a general policy, though, there's been an effort to try to keep that away from the elected officials, simply because there may be, you know, kind of going the other way of giving too much. And so they need somebody, you know, more of an administrative authority to do that. But
I don't mean the mechanics of negotiation. I understand they hire a labor contractor and he day by days churns away at the thing. The question is, who's management? What does management want in this contract? We know what the union wants. What does court management want? Who's management? It can't be the city coordinator. He's not elected. It's somebody who's elected. I mean, we've got to take some political responsibility for this management side of things, and everybody seems to want to run away from it. And does this reorganization under this new charter proposal fundamentally get them to act as managers or not? Or do we just continue this? Hey, I'm not responsible.
Thank you, Clarence. Paul Ostro.
Thank you, Lee. Well, first of all, it's the executive committee to whom updates on labor negotiations are provided. None of that is ever public. You'll see an executive committee agenda, and all that agenda will say is update on police negotiations. The meeting's immediately closed. So I have not been following the agendas, but none of that is ever public. But in terms of overseeing negotiations, that has specifically been the executive committee, and it's been completely secretive. So the public has absolutely no idea what's really going on. As a member myself of the Charter for Change, what I struggle with most, and this responds in part to the political questions, is to what extent do we have to sharpen our message to this extent? I think people have recognized that all of our rhetoric as a progressive city is pretty empty, to be blunt. And those of us who have served the city, you know, Lee, you're among them, and John, and obviously many people leading the effort for the charter change. That's kind of a tough message for us to not only give but receive. But the reality is that for all of our talk of being such a progressive city, we have the worst home ownership gaps, the worst equity gaps, perhaps the biggest problem with police misconduct. We've had a lot of theatrics and a lot of rhetoric about progressivism, but in no way have we lived up to any of that. So to what extent does our message need to be to that point? How is it that this city that is, because that's an awakening that a lot of people, I think over the last couple of years, have realized that all of the image that we like to have of ourselves as a city is anything but reality. So what I struggle with is how And then how do we put that in a historical context is the other point I wanted to make. I'm not sure we're doing that enough yet. Hubert Humphrey wanted charter change. Don Fraser, Martin Sabo, Citizens League, Star Tribune, right on down the line, League of Women Voters. People have been asking for this for 75, 80 years. And to what extent do we need to look at the failure of Minneapolis city government historically, how we've gotten to where we've gotten, how we've failed to address the issues as a city. And that's a harder message for us, again, to give, as especially those of us who've been involved in city government ourselves. But I'm struggling personally with that. I'm just one part of this, and we want to have a unified message, and I don't want to get off that unified message. But are we going to need to be a little harder hitting? Because I think when we just talk about lines on an org chart, I think we lose people. But if somehow the message can be, how have we gotten to this point where as a city we've continually failed to meet these challenges? What has caused that? Why have we so consistently failed? And then put that into context of the theater, because that's, I think, what people see as Minneapolis politics as simply theater. It's a bunch of bold statements and pronouncements, but nothing actually ever gets done. I think that's how this gets over the finish line, perhaps. But those would be the comments I'd limit myself to today.
Thank you, Paul. Tom, did you want to respond to that, Cherie, or comment?
Yeah, I think what it makes me think, as a new resident of Minneapolis and not knowing what a lot of you know and understand, when we think the most important thing at this point is getting this amendment passed, and the majority of the people are going to know even less than I know, and they're going to be voting on this. And I just think confusing it with trying to say it's going to solve public safety when in my opinion, it's a structural change. And why is it a structural change? So that we can address that. That, to me, it's got to be simple. And it's got to say, first of all, that the police department wouldn't be eliminated, because surveys have shown that that's important. People want a police department. But it's got to be so simple that they kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, I want a police department and I want a city structure that can reform the police department. But I just think we have to keep it really simple, because that's who the voters are, and that's what they're going to respond to. I just don't know how to do that, and I don't know if this does that.
Sonia, did you want to comment? You're on mute, Sonia.
I want to follow up on Cherie's point, because I take a strongly different view, which is that a couple of you have said public safety reform is the central issue of this time. And we know lots of well-educated, politically engaged people who say, that's my highest priority. And oh yes, government structure, I'm interested in that, but public safety reform is critical. And so I think if we want this amendment to pass, we have to sharpen our message, as you all have been saying, but to sharpen our message about the relationship between the two. And that's what we are trying to do with this particular presentation. I think the comments you're making are going to put us back on the drawing board. And Paul, anything we come up with, we'll pass on to you, because it's a work in process. And you're all laying out challenges that make it helpful for us to keep moving in on it.
Thank you. I have Tom Abels and then John Adams. So Tom, you want to unmute yourself?
Yep. My question is, it's been touched on by Clarence and Paul, and recently just by Cherie, right? As a resident of the city, what is in this amendment for me? What is it going to, the police department is one issue, but there are a lot of other issues which the citizens are frustrated about, And it's got very little to do with what this charter amendment does. There's nothing in it that says, I am going to have more access. My voice is going to be heard. The people are putting the amendments for the police department up because they're frustrated because the city can't do anything about it. But there are other issues that are similar to that that are not as a hot button currently, that the citizens are basically ignored. And it's ignored because how the departments are run, how the mayor is operating. I think early on in this conversation it was mentioned, it depends on who's sitting in that slot, the mayor's slot, the department head slot, and who has the voice. And there's very little that is going to change by the charter amendment. And the city council will just, instead of voting as a block, are going to be lobbying the department heads, the mayor's office, and it's fragmented because, and that means the council is thinking about maybe passing legislation and amendments and things like this and operational things, which they're going to be allowed to do in order to basically corral the mayor and the department heads who are not being responsive to the needs of the citizen. So as a citizen, I don't see that I'm getting any benefit by voting for it. And the police department is just a hot button right now, but you can see that the citizens are settling out. Chicago and 38th Street is open, but Black Lives Matter is still very much alive and wants a voice. And I don't know how it's going to get a better voice with what's happening here.
Tom, I agree with you that I somehow or another relating this to how what citizens get out of city government is an important part of it. It happens that the police department is by far the largest focus. So it's sort of maybe the thing that people are thinking most about, but there's a whole set of other things that people may have problems with in City Hall. Somehow or another, this complexity is really leading to, and the Charter Commission did a very thorough job of going and talking to department heads and former department heads, and elected officials, and found that this complexity really leads to a kind of a diminished, in some cases, the council members are using their authority over hiring and firing department heads, through the executive committee process, of course, threatening department heads in order to get something they want. Now, maybe it's something that's important for their constituents, but they're also getting involved in policies that are contrary to what so sorting out this executive and legislative power, and there is, provisions for, the constituent services that council members do, but the council members get too engaged in trying to run departments and try to tell department heads what to do, threatening department heads. Again, how we can, I think as Clarence and others have said, how we can get those maybe crisper examples that we can give to people. But I personally believe, and how to make this case, that people will be better served. They'll get more out of it. Right now, people don't understand how city government works, and this could help simplify it. Mary,
well, let me follow. Okay. I don't disagree with you, Lee. What I'm saying is, I am sitting in a chair at the League of Women Voters listening to this presentation. I'm sitting somewhere else, citizens seeing what is trying to be doing. The presentation does not tell me how I am better off. It just says that internally, you guys the city's able to function much better, but the citizens don't see in this presentation where they are better off by voting for the amendment. other than helping the mayor and the department heads and the council untangle some internal squabbles. But what does it mean to me to make me pull the lever to vote yes on this amendment?
Okay, thank you. So Mary Moos, did you want to?
I want to ask Tom a point of clarification. What I hear you saying is that we need to put the citizen as the primary center of this presentation, rather than presenting the problems and the solution. The first issue is putting the citizens in the center, what the problem does and how they are affected by it, what the solution does and how they are affected by it.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Whatever it's going to happen, if it's better, but as a citizen, I have to be able to listen to your presentation and saying, yes, I'll buy what you're selling me, you know, and you're not speaking to me. You're basically all the, Don Samuels, everybody else who testified in that thing, and Sharon Sales Belton and all the rest of them are talking about the problems they've got internally, but that's city hall politics, city government politics, but it doesn't speak to me as to what I am getting out of this. And it's in the presentation and the articulation, and maybe that will help clarify what's going to happen with the police department, how it's going to operate and all the rest of it. But I have to see that it means something to me to pull the lever on a yes vote on this particular amendment.
That's a good point. What I would call it when I was in my marketing business was the WIFM, what's in it for me. And too many people forget that. And I think we're focusing on the problem and not the individual citizen.
Thank you. John Adams, unmute yourself.
I'm old enough to remember a time when the local newspaper was a principal outlet for points of view, and editorial page recommendations carried a lot of weight in municipal elections. I'd like to know how the message that the wonks are discussing these days is going to get into the heads and ears of the voters. Municipal elections aren't the most popular elections to begin with. But the people who pay attention to local affairs are also people who want to hear how to think about this stuff. So my question is, how does what we're talking about today reach those people who are likely to vote? And let me know about this, because local newspapers, they're not, first of all, people don't read them anymore. The 10% of us who get a daily newspaper and read it are a very, very small minority. And I also suppose that the people who are going to vote are people who, in fact, are looking at the paper. But what are the mechanisms for getting this discussion into the heads of people who are likely to vote? How are we doing that? Or how are you folks doing that?
Sonia.
Well, one of the things we know is that there is going to be an advertising campaign that is a companion to this. I don't know the starting date when this language is going to go into social media and other forms, but that is intended. This project, Charter for Change, is an educational project, and the advertising will be clearer, more succinct, hopefully impacted by the kind of things that you're raising today, because we are a channel, we and Paul are channels to get the whole project to hear what we're learning from you. But it will become popularized as much as a campaign can do that.
Okay, thank you.
And for example, meetings are happening all over the city. A day or two ago, John and I were meeting with Nakima Levy-Armstrong, who is very opposed to the public safety amendments and believes that the majority of Black people are. And recommended very specific churches and other places where we should be doing this kind of meeting. And those identified groups are bubbling up now as you all begin to identify people we should be talking to. So any ideas like that, you know, I don't know if you get them to Janis or Lee, you all have Lee's email, any of that would really be useful to us and to this campaign.
Good.
I think that I think that's a good suggestion, but I suggest also when you take your presentation to those communities, I think you need to focus in on how this change is going to improve governance that impacts them where they are. Because right now, what is being sold now in the wards is that particularly those council members who support the public safety thing, that their rhetoric now is all about how they need to gain control of the police and have the police report directly to the city council.
Yeah.
And I think that what you need to do is have something in your presentation as to how that having something like that is going to be counterproductive and can be disastrous, because you've got 13 wards that are different, and there's not the same level of they're not, the power, the influence is not equally distributed. And
so do you have ideas that, you know, are 3 or 4 points, whether you say them now or maybe you send them to Lee? What should be the message that is specific to people who live, let's say, on the north side?
Yeah, well, you know, I don't have you know, a specific message that I could give to you at this moment, but I have had some discussions with people from at least my council members' office, and we've had debates around where they are headed with this and how it is not going to achieve the goals that they are seeking. And part of what they are, the whole group, is that they do not understand the history of what has happened in the relationship between the police and the community, and are unwilling to take into consideration views that may be contrary to the view that they have established. So all of the people they're seeking information from are those who will reinforce the need for that level of change, public safety, and how that's going to make a difference. And I think that if you have an opportunity to have conversation with smaller groups in some of these communities, and focus in on the relationship between the city council and the mayor, and how the people in one particular council is concerned essentially about what's going on there, and the environment is different in Ward 5 than in Ward 11, 12, or 13, and that those are going to be different challenges, and the power, the ability to make change is different there. The council members from those wards has more clout than the council member from the 5th ward.
So would it be possible for one of us to talk to you during the next couple of days about some of those ideas?
Yeah, I'd be glad to.
Okay, thank you.
You know, to echo T to a certain extent, because I've been sort of involved on some projects on the north side, but also on the south side. And the issue right now with the police department and some of these other issues are present issues which have future ramifications. But nobody from the city council whose role is going to be changed, no one from department heads, no one from the mayor's office or the mayor himself personally have come up and said, this is going to help me work with you in a more effective manner. In other words, you're basically talking to them about the city council, but the city council is not talking to its constituency as to why this is going to make things move better and be more responsive to the wants of the citizens. So I think you need to get those people involved and saying, I'm going to support this amendment because we're going to be able to deal more effectively, or whatever the position that they want to take that's going to be pro this amendment. The mayor has to do this. The mayor's didn't even get, I believe Clarence said, didn't get endorsements from the DFL to run again. So
but no one else was endorsed either. So,
pardon?
No one else was endorsed. The history has been that you don't usually get mayoral endorsements. So at least recently.
Well,
so,
I think I understand, but the issue is the council and the mayor and the department heads, even the police department, have to say, this is going to let me be more responsive to you in these manners, you know, because otherwise I'm going to be running to my ward council member or to one of the council members who I see as important and have them lobbying in the back along with other lobbyists. And we've got the same game, you know, going on.
You know, I think your point is well taken, though, that there are some very vigorous council races going on throughout the city, and they are kind of sorting themselves out primarily on the public safety amendment. Those who support that public safety amendment, and those who oppose defunding or dismantling the police department, and they've taken some pretty definitive positions on that amendment. This amendment you know, I think I know of some of the council members who are challenging existing council members are supporting this amendment, but it's not as vigorous, you know, and likewise the mayor, I think, has indicated some degree of support, but there's not, among elected officials currently in office and those running, I agree that I don't know that they've taken as strong a position on that. And our group, the Charter for Change, of course, is not, you know, we're nonprofit education group. We're not engaged through this organization. Individually, we may be involved in campaigns, but we're not involved in, you know, so which candidates you should support and that sort of thing. But ultimately, it will come down to who's elected to those offices, but then what is the structure that they're working under? And do we have a police department, or do we start over from scratch with no police department? So those are the kinds of questions that the voters are going to be presented with. And, you know, it's kind of our job to explain, you know, how this amendment can make things better. So I think who was, Clarence had his hand up first and then Ed. Dirkswater.
Yeah, I guess, again, a couple of my concerns is this business of having examples of problems that you see with the way things are organized right now. And in the police arena, I think the most compelling statement you've made is that with the council's proposal that the police chief report to the council, we're going to have that police chief trying to report to 14 different bosses. The question then is, so what? What's going to happen? Why is that so bad? Is it all that obvious? No. Give me some illustrations of how this is in the midst of civic turmoil, in the midst of fires, in the midst of whatever activity. Is this organization fundamentally going to be a better one than what the city council is proposing? I think you have to get down and dirty in some of this stuff, because if you don't, it's going to be over people's head and they're just sort of dealing with the theory of this thing. I think the other piece of this thing is getting somehow or another getting people who are running for office trying to support this thing, or getting legislators to support it, or getting a number of other people who we have some anticipation are going to become responsible more than they have been in dealing with these questions. I mean, there's a whole legislative delegation from the city of Minneapolis. Where are they at with respect to the police issues in Minneapolis and the leadership of the city to deal with it, and the management of the contract negotiations and the changes they want to see in the state law? Those are the guts of the issue. And I know that's still kind of heady to a lot of people, but it's going to make a world of difference to this thing. I mean, you got right now a police chief who basically said, hey, I'm out of the negotiations. I'm not going to be part of that thing at all. And I've disciplined some guys, fired them in fact, but it's going to be up to the courts and whoever to resolve what we're going to do and how we're going to address this thing. And there's a sense on the part of at least many citizens, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense the way we've got this set up right now. How should this be reformed? How should this be changed? And I think this Charter Commission proposal is going to have to be fairly direct about how they have some expectations of leaders in this city, namely the mayor, leading on these questions in a way that we haven't seen it.
Okay, Ed? Gertzwager.
I'd like to disagree with Clarence first and then talk about something Paul Ostro said. Clarence, if you've got 13 bosses, you don't have any.
I understand.
You've got one boss, you have a boss, and that boss can hold you accountable and develop plans for the year, objectives, etc. If you've got 13 bosses, that's going to be totally impossible. But that's one of the key things I would emphasize if I were you people, and you do, is that we can have greater accountability for services, not just better efficiency, but when you have 13 bosses, you can't get accountability. The next thing I would say is, and this piggybacks on what Paul said, it isn't just the police department, but there are a lot of strategic directions that are impossible to achieve when you don't have some coherence and some unity and someone who can hold others accountable for achieving it. The mayor can give a state of the city address and identify his or her priorities, but if the mayor can't hold somebody accountable for delivering on that, it won't happen. In your presentation, and I don't remember the whole thing, you make a big thing about 14 bosses getting in the way of efficiency and such. That's important. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is that if you have 14 people trying to determine where the police department ought to go, where housing ought to go, where poverty ought to go, where rent controls ought to go, where the strategic direction should be, you aren't going to have much. And what you do have will be splintered. So I would look over that presentation, maybe add a sentence or two. I'm not talking about big changes, but it isn't. The 14 bosses relates to accountability for everything, and especially relates to accountability for the big things.
Thank you. Tom, did someone have a comment? Oh, Sonia.
Well, I want to follow up both to the last two questions and comments. I think the danger of the public safety amendments, either one of them, is that it formalizes the bad behavior or the dysfunction of the council now. And a perfect example, which I think we have to somehow slip into our presentation, is that the current mayor and the chief do have an agenda. And there's some very strong items in there for reforming the police department, but they are constantly undermined. In this amendment that clarifies that the council would be a legislative body, there's even a recommendation for funding that they get additional aids and additional staff to help them really do a better job at legislating. And it constrains them from the behavior they do now. Of course, some of it will still happen, but it will become clearer. And I don't know quite how we can say that simply and directly, but that example seems to me one of the best ones. Every time the chief recommends something and the mayor approves of it, they, at least 8 or 9 of the council people figure out a way to degrade that. So we want to give the positive example. Then with this new amendment, what would happen that would constrain the dysfunction?
So I think we'll take one more question or comment from Tom, and then we should probably wrap it up. Tom?
Okay, well, just one point. The emphasis that you are a nonprofit educational organization is not necessarily as honest as one would want it to be. Other than the League of Women Voters is pretty politically neutral. This organization has a mission, and therefore it colors the decisions and how people perceive what's being presented. Okay, so that is, you know, the other thing is that this charter amendment is going to be on the ballot, but so may be both of the police amendment, one or the other of those charter amendments may end up on the ballot. And if that passes and the amendment passes, then we're in a totally different position. And so the city council and the mayor and the department heads have to figure out and how indeed what happens if there is one of those police amendments that is passed and has to be implemented. It becomes a very interesting question that has to be dealt with. And therefore, I think it's, again, I go back to my original point as John has pointed out, I think Clarence and we've sort of overlapped a little bit. The citizens have to figure out whether they're going to be better off getting the police amendment passed and ditching the council, the charter amendment from the commission, or that the charter amendment from the commission is going to enhance anything that gets done with regard to the police department, with regards to what the department heads are doing right or wrong in North Minneapolis or in South Minneapolis or around the city of Lakes, anything else in the city, one of the other wards of the council. So I think that that's an issue that is looming that nobody is considering. What happens if one of those police amendments gets onto the ballot, and all of a sudden this whole picture of what the commission is changes. And I don't know as a citizen, how to react to the commission's amendment if indeed it seems biased in one direction or the other with respect to the decisions regarding an amendment that gets on the ballot about the police department. There isn't that option. And that's why, again, I'm saying, as a citizen, how do I make up my mind that I'm going to be better off with or without the police amendment, with or without the commission, or combinations thereof? And I think that the people that are going to have to live under that, including those people that are running for election, need to be able to be part of this discussion. And I need to see, as a citizen, what my ward potential, whether on ranked choice voting, whether I choose A or B or C or D in my ward, and everybody else has to figure out if indeed they're going to be better off, if indeed they support this amendment. And I think I think you need to address that issue, as Mary has pointed out.
So, I mean, people are going to have to decide whether they want to support the approach of the public safety amendments, and both of them may be on the ballot, or maybe just one, because the council may withdraw and leave the petition amendment. However, basically, if you vote for that, you're saying you're supporting defunding and dismantling the police department as it is now, creating a whole new department. And you're, depending on who you elect as your city council and mayor, if that passes, then their job is to get rid of the police department, essentially. So you have to make, that's one decision you have to make. The other decision is this structural amendment, will it make city government work better overall? And will it help move forward police reform? We're trying to make the case, and we need to figure out a better way of doing that, that's how that will happen. There is some, Barry Clegg, who chairs the Charter Commission, has his assessment that if both of these passed, that the Charter Commission amendment, that the new public safety department would be appointed, the head of that would be appointed by the mayor, but it would still eliminate the police department as it is today and replace it with this new public safety department. So it's kind of a complicated situation for the voters, and the challenge of all of us and everybody who's running for office is to explain it to the average citizen as to what their how this will affect them and how it will affect the future of our city. So we're looking for more opportunities to do that. Helen, did you have something you wanted to say, or were you trying to give us a wrap up here? Sonia, let's, any final comments by Sonia?
This is a short response.
Okay.
The project Charter for Change, along with Barry Clegg, have done a lot of thinking about how to present these in relation to one another. And Barry Clegg insists that they can coexist. And, as Lee said, it wouldn't be a tragedy if one of the public safety amendments passed and this one did. And we haven't been able to articulate that very well. Lee, I'm wondering if it would be useful to send a couple of paragraphs of thinking by Barry Clegg and others after the meeting, if that could just go to people so you could look at it and see if it is useful to your thinking. Is that something you could do, Lee? Maybe the talking points for that particular issue?
Sure.
Okay, so I guess I would just say thank you so much. This is, this is a great group. Nobody's thinking about these issues in the way you all are. So we four really appreciate your digging in and hoping that we'll get this improved and sharper.
Great. Good luck.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. This has been great feedback on this presentation. And if you have suggestions of other groups that we can present this to, please email me or send it to Civic Caucus, and we'll make sure we follow up. Thank you.